Oftentimes, one of the most important skills you can develop, especially if you are trying to build healthier relationships, is the ability to accurately assess someone's level of empathy. It can make all the difference in determining whether this is a person who is emotionally safe for you, or someone who is going to drain you, confuse you, or slowly erode your sense of self. Empathy is not just a desirable trait in relationships, it's foundational. It affects communication, conflict resolution, intimacy, and the ability to feel seen and valued. Before we get into exactly how empathy works and how you can reliably evaluate it in someone else, I want to remind you that you are not alone in whatever you're dealing with. Many people who find themselves in difficult relationships, whether romantic, familial, or even professional, often think they're the only ones navigating this dynamic. You're not, and you don't have to figure it out by yourself. If you need one-on-one help, there are options available, whether through phone calls, video calls, Zoom, FaceTime, or WhatsApp. Support is one of the most important protective factors when you're trying to heal, understand toxic patterns, or simply make sense of the relational chaos around you. A supportive community, a consistent practice of self-care, and access to education about these patterns can drastically change the direction of your life. But now, let's talk about empathy, especially as it relates to people who may be narcissistic, emotionally unavailable, or chronically self-focused. When we think about empathy, we often think of it in a very narrow way. Someone sitting with us when we're sad, someone comforting us when we're hurting, someone providing compassion when we're experiencing emotional pain. And that is one form of empathy, an important one, but it's not the only form, and if you rely exclusively on this single expression of empathy, you run the risk of getting fooled. Because narcissistic individuals, contrary to what many people believe, can absolutely imitate empathy in the early stages of a relationship. They can observe what empathy looks like. They can mimic concern, nod at the right moments, say the right words, and position themselves as attentive, invested, and caring. In fact, the early phases of a relationship with a narcissistic person often feel incredibly validating because they seem to understand your pain. They seem to be nurturing. They seem to be listening. And for someone who has been lonely or mistreated or misunderstood in the past, this kind of attention can feel like oxygen. This is why early vulnerability can be risky. When you hand someone your pain, your insecurities, your emotional history, or the things that have harmed you, you are giving them a roadmap to your emotional landscape. And a narcissistic person can use that in two ways. They can either mirror it to get closer to you, or they can weaponize it later. But what they cannot do is genuinely feel with you in a consistent, enduring, healthy way. So using your pain as a test for empathy is unreliable, especially in the beginning. A narcissistic person can absolutely present as caring because it benefits them. It helps them gain your trust. It gives them power. It puts them in the position of savior, rescuer, or hero, and that dynamic, where they become the one who heals you, is deeply satisfying to them early on. So if you can't rely on vulnerability, what can you rely on? What is the most reliable indicator of real empathy? Empathy is not limited to sadness. It is not limited to pain. Empathy is the capacity to attune to another person's emotional experience, and respond with understanding, curiosity, connection, or consideration. So empathy has to be evaluated not only when you're hurting, but also when you are experiencing joy, excitement, passion, enthusiasm, or satisfaction. And this is where the truth becomes incredibly clear, incredibly fast. Narcissistic people generally cannot attune to your positive emotional states. They struggle profoundly with your joy, your excitement, your passion, or your enthusiasm, especially when it has nothing to do with them. When you share your joy, you're not giving them control. You're not making them the center. You're simply expressing something authentic about yourself. And that's where you can see the real cracks in their empathy. A genuinely empathic person can be happy for you, not just with you. They can listen to something they don't personally relate to and still connect with your emotional experience. They may not know anything about the topic. They may not share your specific interest, but they can feel your excitement, they can appreciate your joy, they can celebrate your wins, they can ask thoughtful questions, they can show curiosity, they can stay present with you. That's empathy, it's attunement, it's connection. But with narcissistic individuals, you will often see the opposite. When you share something joyful or exciting, you may notice subtle or overt signs of discomfort. They may look irritated, they may shut down, they may abruptly change the topic, they may minimize what you said, they may redirect the focus back to themselves. They may appear confused, annoyed, or even threatened by the idea that you are experiencing something positive that doesn't involve them. And they might not do this in an explosive way. Sometimes it's subtle. A blank stare, a flat expression, a dismissive comment, a lack of interest, a shift in their posture, or a sudden need to leave the room. Those reactions are not random. They are tied to their inability to empathize, not just with pain, but with joy. Narcissistic people cannot tolerate emotional experiences that they do not control, and someone else's joy, especially when it's natural, spontaneous, or deeply genuine, can feel destabilizing to them. It reminds them, on an unconscious level, of their own emotional deficits. It confronts them with the reality that you can feel deeply while they cannot. And instead of being curious or happy for you, they distance, shut down, or derail the moment. So the most reliable way to test empathy early in a relationship has nothing to do with sharing your wounds. It has to do with sharing your joy. Share something you're passionate about. Share something that lights you up. Talk about something that has nothing to do with them. Something that comes from who you are, not what they provide. And then simply observe. How do they respond? Do they engage? Do they ask questions? Do they seem genuinely happy for you? Or do they pull away, interrupt, redirect, or show signs of irritation? Empathy shows up not just in pain, but also in delight, curiosity, and shared excitement. Let me give you some personal examples, because these patterns are not theoretical. They're observable, predictable, and consistent. I remember dealing with certain in-laws who were deeply narcissistic. When my children were very young, still far too young for school, I was already thinking ahead about their education. I was excited about the idea of homeschooling. It was something that genuinely mattered to me. But the moment I expressed that enthusiasm, the reaction I got was not supportive. There was discomfort, there was annoyance, and immediately someone responded with a negative story about homeschooling, implying that it leads to failure or dysfunction. It was as if my excitement was personally offensive. It wasn't that they disagreed with homeschooling. It was that they could not tolerate seeing me joyful or passionate about something meaningful to me. That lack of attunement, that inability to simply let someone else be excited, is a hallmark of low empathy. There was another time when I was sharing something deeply meaningful about my faith with a stranger while out downtown. The conversation was warm, genuine, and heartfelt. Someone from the in-laws was nearby, listening for a few moments, and then suddenly he just said, "I can't hear any more of this," and walked away, not because I was being offensive or overbearing, but because the emotional tone of the moment was too much for him. Again, joy, passion, and meaningful connection triggered discomfort rather than engagement. And one more example, I remember laughing, just laughing genuinely, uncontrollably, at something funny while playing poker at their house. It was the kind of laughter where tears come out. Many people know that kind of laughter. It's cathartic. But when I looked up, the expressions on their faces weren't confused. They were disturbed. They looked almost alarmed or offended. They got up and walked away. Joy, again, was intolerable. This is what happens with narcissistic individuals. They cannot track your internal state unless it benefits them. They cannot sit with your emotions unless those emotions reinforce their role in your life. They cannot share in your joy unless they are the cause of it. And they cannot celebrate you unless it somehow elevates them. That's why, if you truly want to know whether someone has empathy, don't start by sharing your pain. Start by sharing your joy. Share what excites you. Share what makes you feel alive. Share what matters to you. Observe their reaction. Look at their face. Look at their body language. Listen to their tone. Listen to the content of their response. Do they attune? Do they ask? Do they engage? Or do they distance, minimize, or turn the moment into something about them? That will tell you everything you need to know. Because if someone cannot sit with your joy, they will never be able to sit with your pain. If they cannot understand your happiness, they will inevitably mishandle your vulnerability. And if they cannot tolerate your passion, they will ultimately resent your needs, your emotions, and your very aliveness. So if you're trying to evaluate empathy in someone, especially early in a relationship, take your time, share your authentic joy, let it show, and pay attention to what happens next. The reaction you get is not random. It's diagnostic, it's revealing, and it may save you years of confusion, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. If you have questions about this or want to explore your own specific situation, you can always reach out for support. Healing, understanding, and clarity are possible, and you don't have to walk through any of this alone.